It's Thursday, May 24th, 2019, and you're listening to the LaChance podcast. So I want to start out this week by talking a little bit about Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, who I have decided is not a very good person. In fact, I think he's a bit of a jerk. And this has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with the fact that he's a Democrat. It has nothing to do with the fact that he's gay. It has to do with how he treats other people. And I want to start out by talking about his imagined fights. I was going to say fight, but I should say fights, plural, with Mike Pence. Mayor Pete is going around the country basically proclaiming that he's in some war with Mike Pence. He's not. He's not in a fight with Mike Pence at all. The only person who's waging a fight is Pete Buttigieg. And he's using Mike Pence to try to score points with the left. And the reason this bothers me so much is because I've seen reports that say that when Mike Pence was the governor of Indiana, that he was very friendly with Pete Buttigieg. They had a good working relationship. Mike Pence was good to him. And there's no loyalty from Pete Buttigieg for that. He basically is just going around the country stabbing Mike Pence in the back to score points with the left. That's not what a good person does. It's what a jerk does. Now that might just be one, if it was just one isolated incident, you could probably just ignore it. But it's not an isolated incident. Last week he did a town hall event on Fox News. Was very successful in the ratings. Lots of people watched. He got his message out to a whole crowd of potential voters who he might not have reached otherwise. And Fox News didn't have to do this, but they did. And what did Mayor Pete do while he was on Fox News? He used the opportunity to bash Fox News hosts like Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham. And of course, Chris Wallace didn't really do much to push back on that at all. In fact, he really did nothing to push back on it. But it was quite a moment from Pete Buttigieg. I mean, again, he didn't have to be on Fox. Fox didn't have to give him a town hall, but they did. And what did he do? He turned around and used the opportunity to bash people on Fox News. Again, this is the type of person he apparently is. And there's one more incident. Later in the week, President Trump was being interviewed by somebody, I forget who, but the video kind of went viral, where a journalist asked President Trump what he thought of Pete and the fact that he's married to another man. And President Trump was like, hey, whatever, I think it's great. Good for him. And more power to him, whatever. This is a Republican president, certainly the most LGBT-friendly Republican ever in history. And later, maybe like a day or two later, Pete Buttigieg was asked about this, and he dismissed it. It's like he was saying, I don't care. I don't care if Trump approves. No, there's no goodwill from this guy at all. You cannot win with him. If you're against him, he'll use it against you. If you're not against him, he'll use that against you too. These are just not the actions of a nice person. These are the actions of a jerk. The guy is something else. I can't get over his inability to give anyone a break for anything. So that's why I think he's a jerk. Oh, and the other thing is, one other item on Pete Buttigieg that came out this week is he was asked about Thomas Jefferson, founding father, author of the Declaration of Independence. And, did he think that buildings named after Thomas Jefferson should be renamed? This is a thing that has become popular on some college campuses. In fact, at Hofstra University, there is a statue of Thomas Jefferson, and students for the last several years have been trying to get it removed from campus. And every time the administration shuts them down, they just come back again and renew the effort, and they're trying to do it again right now. So Pete Buttigieg was asked how where he stands on this issue, and he basically said, well, yeah, I think, we evolve and change as people, and it's something I think we have to take into consideration. This is a guy who 3 months ago, no one had ever even heard of him outside of Indiana. And he's now telling us that he's more important than the author of the Declaration of Independence. That's just too much to take. So anyway, that's my new feeling on Pete Buttigieg. Not a good guy. Not a good guy, which is too bad, but I don't know how else I can see it. And we have a long way to go till the election, so I imagine that he'll have a chance to offer up more examples of this type of behavior. And now that I've noticed it, of course, I'll be watching for it. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about socialism. So, a new Gallup poll was released this week, which suggests that 4 in 10 Americans now accept socialism in some form or other in American life. And if you're anything like me, you might be asking how we got here. And I have a few ideas about that. I think basically that the left has been playing the long game with this for quite a while, chipping away at resistance to socialism and also chipping away at capitalism by trying to point out the failures of capitalism whenever possible. And capitalism isn't perfect, but it has certainly rescued more people from poverty worldwide than socialism ever has. I think that the left has been playing a very long game with this, very long game. And it goes back further than the beginning of Obama, but I think that there's a point to be made about the 2008 candidacy of Obama. When I remember, I don't know if you remember, but Obama supporters in 2008 would become rabid at the mere suggestion that Obama was a socialist. And I don't know that Obama is a full-blown socialist. I don't think he is. But I think that he has some socialist tendencies, and I think he has connections to other people who are definitely socialist or have socialist beliefs. And if you pointed this out in 2008, it was, of course, denounced immediately as a form of racism by Democrats in the media, because all criticism of Obama was branded as racism back then. But now that we have Bernie, the window has been shifted a little bit. Again, in 2008, if you suggested Obama had any socialist ideas, his supporters went crazy. Many of those same people, 8 years later, in 2016, rallied around Bernie Sanders, who is openly socialist. Now, I know Bernie likes to say it's democratic socialism, but that doesn't change it. Democratic socialism, I mean, I realize that if you really wanted to, you could break down and make some distinctions between the two, but I think that one naturally leads to the other, and I think that's the goal of many people on the left who believe in socialism. So, but if you go back again to 2008, I mean, in 2010, I seem to remember, with the rise of the Tea Party, National Public Radio put out this video. It was like a cartoon that mocked members of the Tea Party as crying socialism, like everything was socialism. And the video was titled, I believe it was called Learn to Speak Teabag. So it was, insulting to Tea Party people on many levels. But one of the ways that it was insulting was by calling them, that they were like panicked over socialism when no one's talking about socialism. You people are crazy. And then, of course, in 2016, on the Democrat side, we have somebody openly running as a socialist, and many of the same people who backed Obama rallied around Bernie Sanders. So, and now, years later, Bernie's running again. And some of the Democrats running in 2020 have distinguished themselves by saying, I'm not a socialist. But many of them have embraced ideas which were first expressed by Bernie, the idea of Medicare for all, the idea of free college. Many of the concepts that Bernie espoused are now being embraced by Democrats running in 2020, even some of the ones who claim that they're not socialists. So the needle has been moved. And I think that just more people are comfortable with the word socialism where they wouldn't have been just 10 years ago. But it's kind of amazing to see. I mean, it could be attributed to a failure of our education system, both lower and higher education, that people don't really remember some of the horrors of socialism throughout history. And there are so many examples, whether it's the Soviet Union, China, and now Venezuela, which have all sort of led to financial disaster, famine, death, particularly in the history of the Soviet Union and China. In the Soviet Union, you had multiple famines that killed hundreds of thousands, millions of people. Same thing in China with Mao's Great Leap Forward. He basically starved millions and millions of his own countrymen to advance his agenda, which was socialist and driven by socialist ideas. And people who are younger these days, by younger I mean mainly sort of millennials and younger, many of them don't seem to know this or don't seem to care, which makes absolutely no sense. And the examples of socialism's success, which supporters of socialism will often point to, are countries in Scandinavia like Sweden and Norway. But they also forget that those countries weren't always socialist. They have a very solid financial foundation, which was built mainly through a quasi form of capitalism. And especially in the case of Norway, a lot of their wealth was built by fossil fuels. Their fossil fuel industry is huge. And of course, in the socialism of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, fossil fuels are going to be eliminated. So that should give you an idea of where the American left wants to go. Also, I think I've never been to Scandinavia, but I'd love to do a sort of man on the street interview with some people there and find out just how many people are happy about where those countries are right now. I have a feeling, especially in Sweden, you'd meet quite a few people who would love to see a change there. But again, in the United States, the socialist left is largely driven by AOC and her comrades in Congress. And this whole Green New Deal plan of hers is very little about the environment and very much about replacing capitalism with socialism. It's a Trojan horse. And you just need to look at it to realize that. So much of it has to do with banning fossil fuels and controlling how people live and how they're allowed to build. The plan calls for retrofitting every building in the United States, which is absolutely insane. But again, that's the long game with the left, and she probably also put out a sort of exaggerated version of what she really wants because she's hoping to get at least some of it through eventually. Although it was kind of funny when Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans put it up for a vote that none of the Democrats voted for it. Not one of them, because they didn't want to be associated with it later. They didn't want to get caught being associated with it. And of course, they all tried to play it off as, oh, this is a sham vote. This isn't real. Well, if it isn't real, then how could it hurt you to vote for it if you support it, if you support the plan? Anyway, I think it's just a Trojan horse. I think that the real goal of the Green New Deal, is the phasing out of capitalism and the introduction of socialism. And if AOC, if I ever met her, that would sort of be one of the first things I'd want to ask her about. Although, I don't know, I can't picture having a conversation with her, partially just because her voice drives me crazy. But that's really all I have to say about that. I don't understand the rise of socialism, and I don't understand why, in a booming economy with record low unemployment and near record GDP, why anyone would be talking about, hey, let's go back and try this awful idea that's failed throughout history again and again and again. It makes absolutely no sense. That's all I really have to say on that topic for now. I do have one other thing that I want to talk to you about. It's sort of a movie recommendation and a book recommendation at the same time. It's a really fascinating story, so give me a moment and we'll get to that. So lately I've been seeing ads on television for a new miniseries called The Name of the Rose, which, if you've never heard of it, is based on a 1980 novel by an Italian writer named Umberto Eco, who died in 2016, just recently. And anyway, it's a fascinating story, and I have not seen the miniseries. However, seeing the ads for the miniseries, I also haven't read the book, although I've heard it's fantastic, and I do plan to read it at some point. I have not yet read it. But seeing the ads for the miniseries has reminded me of a 1986 film adaptation of the novel, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about, because it's a fantastic film, and if you've never seen it, I highly recommend it. Again, it's a 1986 movie. The starring role is Sean Connery, who plays a monk, a Franciscan monk, and his sort of protege is played by Christian Slater. And Christian Slater was still a very young man at this point. He was like maybe in his early 20s, or maybe like 18 or 19. I'm not exactly sure. Anyway, so Sean Connery and Christian Slater are a monk and his protege, or his student or pupil, or whatever you want to call it. And they're headed to this monastery in Italy for this big religious conference with a bunch of other monks, Franciscan monks and Benedictine monks and other orders of monks, to debate like religious issues, things in the Bible, things of that nature. And it's set in the year 1327, so it's like the Dark Ages. And the monastery that they're headed to, at least in the film, I'm not sure about the novel, but in the film, it's this, it looks like a castle, and it's set on top of a hill, almost like a mountaintop castle. And it's a very dark story, because as the two of them arrive at the monastery, they find out that something very dark is happening at the monastery. There have been murders, or there's been at least one murder, and then while they're there, more murders take place. And the Sean Connery character is even though he's a monk, he's very committed to reason, and he's almost sort of like a detective, like a medieval Sherlock Holmes type character. And the abbot of the monastery enlists the Sean Connery character to try to figure out who is committing the murders at the monastery. So he starts looking into it, and he begins to find that the murders seem to be connected. There's a connection. And over the course of the movie, you're right there with him as he sort of figures out how he connects the dots between these murders. It's a really fascinating story, and It gets into all different aspects of history too, because eventually the Inquisition is called to the monastery, and there are accusations of witchcraft, and of course there's the underlying theme of reason versus religion and superstition, because again, the Connery character is, even though he's a monk, he's very committed to reason, whereas many of the other monks at the monastery believe that the murders represent different warning signs of the coming apocalypse. So that sort of runs through the whole story as well. It's also a fascinating commentary on the power of the written word, because, and I'm not going to ruin it for you here. Nothing I've told you will ruin the story. But there is a sort of through line which connects the whole story about a specific book or books, which is a very sort of monkish subject. There's a section of the monastery which is devoted to, illuminating and creating transcripts of books. And so there's an underlying theme there as well that runs throughout the whole story. It's a fantastic movie. Again, The Name of the Rose, 1986 film. Even if you've seen the new miniseries, I think it would be a great compliment to either read the book or watch the 1986 film as well. Great story. Great story. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend it. Just note that it's not for the faint of heart. It's very graphic. There's some graphic sex. There's some graphic violence. I believe it's rated R. It's certainly not a film for kids. But if you're into history, if you like period pieces, if you like murder mysteries, if you like sort of religious, historic themed films, I would highly recommend it. So you might want to check that out. The 1986 film, The Name of the Rose, with Sean Connery and Christian Slater. And that's my movie recommendation of the week. That's pretty much all I have for this week. I hope you're doing well. I hope you have a great weekend. Until next time, keep it real.